Hello and welcome to More Than Mondays, a podcast for believers by believers to encourage, challenge, and shift our perspective as we go throughout this week. On this week's episode, we have my friend Riley Sewell talking to us a little bit more about what it means to be righteous. I hope you enjoy this week's episode. Hey, Riley, thank you so much for spending some time this week with us on More Than Mondays. I'm really excited about our conversation today as we dive a little bit deeper into righteousness. That's our topic today. It's really exciting. I was going to share with the world your last name, but you suggested that it doesn't really matter because it's going to change soon. So, well, but we're looking forward to it, and I'm really excited about this conversation, especially after some of the things you shared with me. And so, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Well, Riley, before we get started, I want to let you take some time to share a little bit about who you are.
Okay. Well, my name is Riley, and you're going to detect an accent pretty soon because I grew up in New Zealand. So I grew up there on a farm with my family, but as a family, we have traveled to over 30 countries. So my childhood was a lot of we would go to a missions trip, or we'd be in Thailand working at an orphanage that rescued children from the sex trade, or just backpacking in different countries. So even though New Zealand was the home base, I was actually born in London, and then New Zealand became the home base. Throughout my childhood, we were still constantly on the move, but going back to New Zealand. I just finished my master's in global leadership at Fuller Seminary, and that was incredible. God just turned my world inside out, and especially a whole lot of character development. I think I knew I was going in there to get the academics and the intellectual stimulation, only to figure out it was actually my character that God was going to zoom in on the most over the last 3 years of studying. I do a lot of public speaking and writing, and one of my best guy friends and I run an Instagram, and it's a community called Riley and Riley, Riley and RYLIE, and it's a platform to create space for singleness and how can we change the culture around singleness, and knowing that healthy singles can change a culture. And then the last part of my life currently is I run a blog called Journal of a 25-Year-Old Virgin, where I talk a lot about sexuality, pornography, why do we make certain decisions when it comes to our sexuality, and how can we do it in a way that it's not the rule, it's the reason, that's our motivation.
I love that. And that's so exciting. All of the stuff she's talking about is so amazing. She's an amazing person. And I love what you said there at the very end. I think it's so important and so key for us to understand the reality of it's not the rule, it's the reason. That is leading us right into what I feel like our topic is today, which is righteousness. So I want to ask you this question. What do you think when you hear the word righteousness?
Well, I feel like I've been on such a journey to understand what righteous means, because you hear it and you're like, okay, that sounds like someone who makes a lot of right decisions, especially when it comes to moral right decisions. And yet when you look at the Bible, righteousness is defined by something that is only found in God, that it doesn't have to do with human merit or experience, or in other words, our works, but it has little to do with what humans do and a whole lot to do with what God has done and what he is doing. Because if righteousness means the one who is right or right standing, then as humans, we know ourselves well enough, we know that we're never going to be perfectly right standing.
Right.
And so that forces us to turn to the cross, which is the perfect image of a man who never did anything wrong, and yet he died for the ones who did everything wrong. And to me, that is righteousness. That is not about my actions as a human and my merits and achievements, but it first comes from my identity in Christ. That it is from, sometimes I feel like when we hear righteousness, we think actions that inform our identity, but instead it's identity that informs our actions. And a great analogy that I often use when it comes to righteousness is, let's say, imagine you are in a desert and you're really, really thirsty, and it's been a really long time that you've had water, and all of a
Yeah.
sudden you see this of water, and it's dirty water. It's kind of disgusting, but you're so thirsty, you want anything. But then you walk a little bit longer and you see this stream of like fresh water. Like, which one are you going to pick? Obviously, the stream of fresh water. And I think that
Hmm.
that's what happens when we experience the righteousness of God, that the world offers us this pot of dirty water. And because so often in our human desperation, we want to drink something, we want to be full with something, we'll go for the
Yeah.
dirty water, only to realize that it's the stream of water that God has to offer is so much more filling and so much more healthier for our souls and our bodies and our mind. And I think that once you've tasted that water of God, once you've tasted his goodness, then you only want that water, because you're like,
Yeah.
why would I drink water?
That that's so good. That's such a great example, and it's so important because when we realize what that is and what it comes from, right? Because we're constantly trying to fill ourselves with something. Like you're
Mm-hmm.
saying, we're thirsty for something, and that something can be the world, or it can be God. And when we realize that, we take these drinks of who God is, we begin to desire more and more of that in our lives. And that's really where that begins to change, right? It begins to wash out the, for lack of better words, garbage or dirtiness in us. It washes that out and replaces it with his goodness, with his righteousness. That's so good. So my next question for you is how did you come to this understanding? Because I know for me, it was a journey. I was like rules guy. I had to follow all the rules. And if I made a mistake on a rule, I had to start over. I got to set back, and now I got to, do it all again so that I can be righteous. But how did you come to this place of understanding that, kind of like you said about your blog, it's not about the rules, it's about the reason. So like, how did you get to this understanding?
It's been hard because it goes against so much of what is in our natural inclinations, that we live in a society that is obsessed with accomplishments and achievements and what you can acquire, and that becomes our identity. And yet God's like, no, your identity is first a beloved daughter of God. But it's really hard to shift our mindsets because we want to work for our identity, and God's like, there is nothing you can do or work for. Your identity simply was stamped on your forehead the moment you were born. And even before that, God is like thinking of us thousands of years ago and being like, I need that daughter, I need that son, and at this certain time I'm going to create him. And I think for me, why it was so hard for me to understand is because my family survived a tsunami in 2004. And it's a whole story, but we had to run for our lives, and 280,000 people died that day. And so ever since that moment, I have almost battled with this indebtedness that I felt like I owed God, because here I am, this 10-year-old girl on an island running for my life, witnessing death all around me, and being a part of the 1% of survivors. It put this thought in my mind that I was spared by God, therefore I owe God. And yet that's so far from what righteousness tells us. From godly righteousness tells us you can do nothing, you don't owe God, because the debt has already been paid, and a bloodstained cross proves so. And so I remember this one time I would work so often from my human doingness, but we're not a human doing, we're a human being. And what I would
Yeah.
do was my identity. And to shift back to that beingness, that it's being a beloved daughter of God, what defined that shift from doing to being is I had a mentor session with my spiritual mentor, and she sat down, and I was just updating her, and she was listening to me update, and she was hearing me say, I've done this, I spoke at this event, and she's like, Riley, just so much of what you're saying, of so much of what your goodness of what you're saying has a lot to do with what you're doing. And then she just hit me. She's like, Riley, if you never ever did anything right again, anything right, if you were to sit on your couch and never work for God again, never work in ministry, never help influence someone's life, God still loves you. And she reminded me that Jesus was publicly baptized, and God declared his belovedness publicly at Jesus' baptism before Jesus had even started his public ministry. And that's just such a beautiful sign of Jesus. We don't have a whole lot of what he did when he, like, as he was working as a carpenter, and yet God is like publicly like, I love you, son. And the same goes for us, that even if we don't ever do anything right ever again, God would happily publicly declare how much he loves us. And so I
Yeah.
feel like once I had that meeting with my mentor, she's like, Riley, everything you do in your life has to come from that place of belovedness. And belovedness, I feel like it has so much to do with righteousness. Like, belovedness is why and how we can access our righteousness. It's because we were beloved by God and because Jesus died for us. And so I think that ever since then, that's kind of kickstarted this deep inner work of redefining mindsets and redefining thoughts so that I can come from this place of love. And from that love as a daughter that doesn't need to do anything to claim God and to be with God, that from that place, then all my goodness comes. But before, all my works were flowing into that identity. But like I said earlier, it has to be identity forming actions, not actions informing identity.
That's really good. I think what you're saying is so important, and it reminded me of Proverbs 27 verse 19. It says, as water reflects the face, so one's life reflects the heart. And so for us, it's not a matter, like you said, it's not a matter of doing, it's a matter of being. Righteousness is actually who we are this very moment. Like you said, whether we did another right act in our life or not, God says we are righteous. And I've used this analogy in the first podcast on this series, but I want to keep using this analogy. It's not the fact that you can just go live your life however you want or whatever, but the reality is your wants and your desires change because you are righteous, right? It operates out of this place. It's like uprooting a certain fruit tree. So if you had an orange tree and you uprooted that orange tree and you replaced it with an apple tree, you wouldn't expect the apple tree to produce oranges. Just like God has taken our old nature and ripped it out of us and put in a new nature, you don't expect the new nature to continue to operate and do the same things the old nature would do. But it's a matter of understanding who we are as believers and understanding, starting in this place, that we are righteous. Therefore, our lives reflect that, as Proverbs 27:19 says, you know? So thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you for sharing the reality of what you walk through, because that I can't even imagine walking through, watching death all around you and really feeling that pressure of man, owing God something for saving you. And so as you journey through that with your mentor, how did, if you don't mind sharing, how did, before understanding the human being versus the human doing, how much did that affect your intimacy with Christ as you were trying to walk with him and you were like, God, I know you saved me, so I have to do. How did that affect that intimacy in your quiet times with him?
Well, it felt very transactional. Like, it felt like I could only experience his presence or be given his miracles that he had set up for me because I would do certain things. And in that transactional mentality, I was in a scarcity mindset because I'm constantly working from a lack of like, I'm in debt. When you're in debt, there's a scarcity. But when you're in righteousness, there's an abundance, because righteousness is never limited, always an overflow of righteousness. And so when it came to intimacy with God, I think I was just so as if I was going to the bank and transferring money, and like, oh God, I worked this much, now can I have my money? And God was like, that is so far, daughter, from what I set up for you and why I died for you. And even I think of like, in the Bible, it says like trying to produce our own righteousness is actually seen as disgusting by God. And it's Isaiah 64:6. He says, we have all become like one who is unclean, and all our righteous deeds are like a polluted garment. And like God's like, when you try to work for righteousness instead of come from a place of identity and belovedness from the righteousness, then he's like, that's disgusting, because he's like, I can die for that. I can send my son for that. But that's so far from, like, it's like you were saying, it's like trying to use hoping that apples are produced from an orange tree. It's kind of like God. He's like, that's not what I designed you to produce. And more importantly, that's not what I designed you to become. And
Yeah.
I think that there's such a freedom when I shifted to that righteousness / belovedness mindset of knowing that my father just adored me no matter what I did. And that's so hard, but it's also so freeing because the shame is instantly removed. The guilt is
Yeah.
instantly removed. And replaced with it is just this deep, deep love of this flow that will never end. And I just like, this is a super random analogy, but I remember one time my mom and dad and our family, we were in Thailand, and there was this really it was this Shangri-La super elite club, and they only accepted a certain people into this club. And my mom's like, we should go in there. And my dad's like, we don't have an access code. Like, we don't have the VIP passes. What are you talking about? My mom's like, no, we belong there. And so, my mom like confidently walks up and she's like, hi, we'd like to come into the club. Like, just like shoulders back, posture up, like just claiming herself, knowing that she had the right to be there, even though she didn't have the VIP pass. And my dad's kind of hiding behind, being like, oh my gosh, she's gonna security's gonna escort her out. Like, what is she doing? And next thing you know, we're being like welcomed into this club, and my whole family's just being ushered in, and we have the most incredible food, and it was incredible. But why I share that story is because my mother knew she belonged there. My father did not think he did. And I think that has a lot to do with this mindset that righteousness, a person who's righteous knows they belong in a place that they're not worthy to be at, but it's because of their identity based in God. My mom is just so confident. And that's such a beautiful analogy of what it looks like. Before I was working up that, oh God, I don't belong there. I have to work. I have to go get a VIP pass. Like, I have to work for that pass to get into this elite club. My mom's like, no, I belong there. It doesn't matter if I don't have a VIP pass, because it's not about me. It's about the confidence within me, which is from God and her.
Wow, that's so powerful. And I think what the reality that we as believers sit in, because we hear this word righteousness and we equate it to the righteousness that the world is talking about, which is actions, which is moral, virtue signaling or moral standards that certain people have. But the reality is none are righteous, all are unclean. But the cool thing is Jesus, and I love this analogy so much, and really the truth that this does is, for the law, if you touched a leper, you immediately became unclean, even if you didn't have, if you weren't a leper yourself. But when Jesus touched a leper, the unclean thing became clean. And so when we accept Jesus, the uncleanness of our unrighteousness becomes clean and righteous, and we get to actually operate as if none of the unrighteousness that was in us was ever a part of our life. Like, we don't have to go outside the camp. We don't have to sit outside of what was rightfully ours because of our past mistakes or mistakes that we lived in our unrighteousness. But when God laid his hands on us and touched us, he actually take the unclean thing and he made it clean. And so we actually, the moment of salvation, get the full righteousness of Christ. And it's just now a matter of, like you said, the difference between your mom and dad is, are we operating in that confidence, or are we operating in we need to get the right status before we're able to stand in this place? And it's such a revelation. It's so exciting to understand the difference between the two is God doesn't want you to do things for him. He's already done it for you. He wants you to just love and live in him and understand who you are now. And so now that we've seen that side of it, how much more how much more fulfilling, how much more, not even success isn't the right word, but how much more fulfilling and life-giving has the doing the things that you get to do for the Lord, not because you have to, but because you guys co-labor and your righteousness exudes out of you through these things. How much more fulfilling has that been? And how has that transfer from your intimacy with the Lord, from transactional to I belong here, been for you in your journey?
Yeah. Well, to go back to the analogy that I gave earlier about you being in a desert needing water, and there's dirty water, and then there's a stream of clean water. I think that once you taste that stream of clean water, well, first of all, you're going to all of a sudden start acting and working and running differently, because
Yeah.
you're drinking something that is so good for your soul and so perfectly designed for who you are, more than just physically, but also spiritually and emotionally. And so I think that's the first thing to know, is that you're going to all of a sudden start acting and speaking differently because you're drinking something that's good. Your source, in other words, is something really good, and that was meant for you. But I think the second fold to that is that all of a sudden, when you've drunk from this like clean stream of water, to go along with this analogy, you're going to want other people to drink from it. Imagine seeing your friends drinking from the dirty water and being like, why would you drink from that? That's just that's disgusting. Like,
Right.
going to proactively going out and ushering people to the stream. Because when you have a good gift, but a gift that multiplies over and over again and is never limited, you're going to want to give the gift to other people. Because who wouldn't want other people to also join you at the stream? Not only do they get that stream of righteousness, but they also get to experience the difference that righteousness makes in their life. And I think one thing that's really important to understand is that for me, it wasn't this sudden shift of me being like, okay, so I am righteous. It's not about my works. It's about God's works and what he's doing. I think that it can be that it wasn't just this one meeting with a mentor and it was one done. It's a constant renewal. And I love the book that Henry Nouwen writes about called Life of the Beloved. And he says that, when it comes to our belovedness, when it comes to our righteousness, there's two parts. The first part is accepting it, that accepting that I am a beloved daughter of God, that I am righteous in God's eyes because of what he's done. But the second part is becoming it. So there's the accepting, and then there's the becoming. And so I think kind of what I'm saying is that in that meeting with my mentor, I realized, wow, like I don't have a debt to pay God. I can work, and even if I ever never work again, he's still going to love me. And I think that was my accepting moment, but the becoming moment is a daily renewal that's intentional about spiritual practices I have in my life. And so like I FaceTime before phone time, which sounds so simple, but it's like FaceTiming God. Like I spend time with God every single morning before I ever check my phone. Therefore, I know what's controlling my mindset for that day. It's not my phone. It's not my friends. It's God. And he was the first thing to touch me in that moment. And so I think there's certain practices that we can put in our lives, spiritual practices, that will allow us to renew that becoming over and over again on a daily basis.
I love that. I love that. And it is so important that it's the acceptance and then the becoming, I would even say like the understanding and the awareness of that acceptance and what that means for you on the daily basis, right? It's that we renew our minds. It's that constant understanding of who we are and who God's created us to be is so good. Thank you so much for sharing. And as we come to a close here, I would love for you to just take 2 minutes of time to just give us an encouragement, whether it be on righteousness, whether it be something else that God's been speaking into your life, or even something practical. I would love to hear it.
Mm-hmm. That's such a great question. I would just say to the person who's listening right now that feels so engulfed by the shame of the things that they've done in the past and feels like God does not want to see the darkness and messiness, I would tell you that I once had this vision of God, and it was me, and I walked into a hallway, and I say this vision because I want you to imagine that you're in this hallway and you're experiencing this. And I was in this hallway, and there's two sides of this hallway, and Jesus meets me in the hallway. And on one side of the wall, it's like all the photos of like framed photos of my best success moments. And it's like me graduating with my master's, like me public speaking, and whoever's listening to this, imagine those moments in your life, the moments of like your heightened success moments, those moments that you're the most proud of in your life, the accomplishments, the achievements. And there was a side, and it was just like, God was like, I love these moments. She's like, I love these moments. I'm like, I do too, God. Like, those are such incredible moments. And then you look to the other side of the wall, and on that wall is your saddest moments, the moments that were your darkest. And the one that for me, when I had gotten back to New Zealand and had to go through having experienced such a traumatic event like the tsunami, or it was the moment when I realized just how much I had screwed up earlier that day, and I'm just sitting in bed crying. And like, these are painful, hard moments for me to look at, and God had framed them. And I'm like, Jesus, why would you frame these moments? Why these moments? And Jesus turns to me, he says, I love these moments because you needed me. You needed me in every moment, and they were so beautiful to me that I framed them. And I say this to the
Wow.
person who listens, that it's not just your success moments that Jesus loves, but it's your moments that you were messy. Because in that moment that you cried out to God, and even if you didn't, he was there. But that moment you're sitting
Yeah.
at the end of your bed and being like, why did I watch pornography again? Or why did I text her again? Or whatever it may be, that Jesus is in that moment. And not only does he sit with you, but he cries with you, that he
Mm,
experiences that with you because he cares more than you could ever imagine. And I just think about Jesus, how he wept with the community as they heard of the death of Lazarus. There he is crying with the community, and yet
yeah.
the next day he acts to redeem and raises Lazarus from the dead. And I just think that that's such a beautiful image of the God we serve, that he will be in that moment of shame and guilt and condemnation, the worst moment of your life, and he will weep with you, only to act to redeem you the very next day.
So powerful. That's so good. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you so much for joining us here today on More Than Mondays. Riley, you're amazing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to More Than Mondays. I hope this conversation encouraged, challenged, and shifted your perspective as you begin this week. Please don't forget to like and subscribe so that you can get our new episodes every Monday at 8 a.m. God bless you.